Good evening and welcome, everyone. I'm Earl Butch Graves, Jr., CEO of Black Enterprise, and it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's Black Enterprise Economic Equity and Racial Justice Town Hall, Bridging the Wealth Gap. We crafted this virtual event for those vested in energizing African-American wealth creation and putting an end to economic disparities that diminish our community once and for all. I want to first thank our sponsor, Nationwide. Corporate responsibility begins with ensuring that all communities have a voice and a platform for economic advancement. And no corporation embraces this role more succinctly than Nationwide. Secondly, I must thank tonight's speakers for participating in this critical town hall session, given our financial status in the current economic environment. You'll meet them in a few moments, but before we start the discussion, a few words. The circumstances that bring us together for this forum boil down to a basic, stubborn, and frustrating reality. We as Black Americans are struggling in a wealth race we simply cannot afford to lose. You've all heard the statistics. Black Americans pace behind whites and every other ethnic group in this country when it comes to measurable markers for economic health, from net worth to home ownership to preparation for retirement. Should current trends continue, the median wealth of Black Americans will fall to zero by 2053, according to the Road to Zero Wealth report published by Prosperity Now and the Institute for Policy. These trends should alarm everyone, regardless of your income level or specific net worth. Wealth creation is much more than just earning a great salary. If all your paycheck does is sustain the trappings of a comfortable lifestyle, you are at best treading water, and treading water is the last thing you do before drowning. At Black Enterprise, the nation's #1 Black digital media brand, we know the so-called road to zero wealth is a challenge, not a prophecy. As a community, Black Americans possess the means and the expertise to close the wealth gap and set us down a different road, a road paved by prudent money management, informed and consistent investment, and a commitment to build multi-generational wealth. During tonight's town hall, we are taking bold steps toward economic equity and generational wealth. Dynamic guest speakers are Donahue Peoples, Chairman and CEO of the Peoples Corporation, and John W. Rogers, Jr., Chairman, Co-CEO, and Chief Investment Officer at Ariel Investments. Our moderator is Emmy Award-winning journalist, entrepreneur, and a good friend of Black Enterprise, Ed Gordon. Before we get started, we are going to hear words from our sponsor, Nationwide. Now let's welcome Christy Rodriguez, Senior Vice President, Nationwide Retirement Institute. Christy?
Greetings and thank you, Butch, and welcome to Black Enterprise's Town Hall, Bridging the Wealth Gap. On behalf of Nationwide, we are excited to co-sponsor this session with Black Enterprise. As a company, we have a long-standing commitment to diversity and inclusion in the financial services industry, based on our belief of having more diversity can benefit our communities. To underscore the importance of this topic, research shows the long-standing wealth disparities between families in different racial and ethnic groups continues to exist. In fact, on average, the typical white American family has 8 times as much wealth as the typical Black family. In other words, the median white household wealth has about $184,000 compared to just $23,000 for the median Black household. Depending on the year, those numbers may vary, but the wealth gap continues to impact our community. As we continue to look for ways to become more financially secure, there are unique financial and retirement planning considerations for underserved communities. An often overlooked element to creating economic wealth equality within Black communities is the need for more Black financial professionals. To help bridge this gap, we have joined forces across the financial services industry and partnered with historically Black colleges and universities to form the Financial Alliance for Racial Equity, or FAIR. FAIR believes that more diverse talent will open doors to serving more diverse communities and ultimately change the trajectory of the wealth gap in our country. FAIR's mission is to increase racial diversity, drive greater equality, and foster inclusion within the financial services industry and communities we serve. This is powerful because research shows while 61% of Black consumers currently working with financial professionals want to work with those who share their racial background, but only 38% are actually able to do so. We believe initiatives like FAIR and this town hall will help prepare our communities for long-term financial wellness and bolster generational wealth for years to come. We appreciate you joining us in such an important and timely conversation. Now, I'd like to introduce and hand it over to our panel moderator, Ed Gordon, CEO of Ed Gordon Media.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ed Gordon, and welcome to the first Black Enterprise Economic Equity and Racial Justice Town Hall. It's the first in a series of 2023. Today, a look at bridging the wealth gap. There is no dilemma faced by Black Americans more dire than the ever-widening chasm when it comes to the wealth of African Americans and white Americans. On every measure, from home ownership to retirement investing, Blacks continue to lose ground. That is confirmed by the fact that the net worth of the typical white family is nearly 10 times greater than that of a Black household, $171,000 versus just over $17,000. Despite the equity pledges made by major corporations during the height of the pandemic, specifically in response to the murder of George Floyd, these institutional mandates to achieve economic parity appear to be falling short. We have two guests perfectly suited to talk about all of this. First, John Rogers Jr., Chairman, Co-CEO, and Chief Investment Officer of the Chicago-based Ariel Investments, the largest Black-owned money management firm with more than $15 billion in assets. And Don Peoples, a game changer in the multi-trillion-dollar real estate industry for close to 4 decades. He's built the Peoples Corporation into the nation's largest Black-owned real estate development firm by constructing a real estate portfolio worth more than $5 billion and designing milestone projects in many key markets, including New York, Los Angeles, and Miami. Gentlemen, welcome. Great to have you with us.
Great to be here.
Let me start out with a generality. And John, I'll start with you. Before we hit air here, you and I were talking about how many times we've been on panels to talk about things like this. I'm curious, we've been talking about closing this wealth gap now for literally decades. And what we've seen, unfortunately, is some regression, quite frankly. It's widening. What do you think has to be done? Part of my issue is I'm not sure that America, I'll put that in quotes, usually talking about mainstream America as the media calls it, white America. I'm not sure that the powers that be even want to see parity, quite frankly. The goose that lays the golden egg, you don't just throw that gold out. What do you think has to be done to see some movement here?
Well, I think there are several things. I think one, we're doing this already just by being here today. We have to educate America on the fact that not only is the wealth gap large, as you suggested earlier, but it's getting worse and worse. Between 1992 and 2016, college-educated Blacks saw their wealth decline 10%, while college-educated whites saw their wealth increase more than 90% over that roughly 25-year period. That's just horrific. We're going the wrong direction. In my hometown in Chicago, we used to have, 3 of the top 150 privately held companies in Chicago were Black owned. 2%, not great. But now 0 of the top 150 privately held companies are Black owned in Chicago. 0. We've lost Johnson Publishing. We've lost Johnson Products. We've lost Independence Bank. All these large institutions that Black enterprise would write about, they've completely disappeared. So we have to educate America on the fact that we're going backwards. The second thing we've got to do is we've got to get our political leaders to lead like the prior generation did. We all know, and a lot of people are young and don't remember, but Maynard Jackson and Harold Washington and Coleman Young were out there fighting for Black businesses all the time, reminding everyone of the responsibility people had to work with Black businesses and how important the jobs were and the philanthropy and the political empowerment that came from large Black businesses of scale. We got to get political leaders to have that kind of mission that my hero, people like Harold Washington and Maynard Jackson had. And then the final thing, we've got to get the anchor institutions in our community to do business with Black people in every aspect of the economy. And that's something that, whether it's a hospital or a museum or a university, they have to do their part, as well as the corporations and government.
Don, let me ask you to kind of follow up and give your thoughts about what John suggested, and then I'll follow up on what something that you said, John, if I may. So, Don, your thoughts.
Yeah, one, I want to echo what John said about politics. I grew up in Washington, D.C. I was born in 1960, so I was around and got keenly aware of what was going on in the civil rights movement. But post-civil rights movement, those leaders went into politics. Maynard Jackson, Harold Washington, Marion Barry, Coleman Young, Tom Bradley in LA. And they were focused on the next chapter, which is what Dr. King began to focus on before he was assassinated, which is economic inclusion, economic opportunity. And what good would desegregation be if Black Americans couldn't afford to do anything? So the focus by those politicians was heavily focused on economic inclusion, and they created an environment of Black entrepreneurship. What happened after that is there was an assault on Black businesses. If you think about what happened in the 1970s when Maynard Jackson got started, and he focused on Hartsfield Airport, when Atlanta decided to build, with his leadership, a international airport, they wanted to make sure how it was built. How it was built was incredibly important. And so Maynard made a commitment of 35% of the contracts to go to Black businesses. Then he had to fight the government, but ultimately he stood tall because he wouldn't issue building permits because the property was where the airport was going to be built within the city of Atlanta. And so he leveraged that power to make sure that there was transformative economic inclusion. And that really set the tone for Atlanta being one of the meccas of economic opportunity. And then other politicians like Barry followed that. And there was an environment of economic inclusion through the 1970s and 80s. And then during Reagan's administration, there began to be an assault against minority businesses. And they went and other businesses went to the Supreme Court to overturn the set-aside program. And then after that, it had to have a disparity study. And then after that, it had to have proven discrimination. And then it was disadvantaged businesses, and it was a broader lens. And so by that point, Black businesses were cast aside and left behind. And then from that point on, there's not been that major focus on economic inclusion. And that's why we lost ground. That's why home ownership rates today are lower than they were in 1968. And you made one point about the wealth disparity. Well, here, the bastion of liberalism, Boston, city of Boston, the Federal Reserve did an analysis, and it said the average household net worth of a white household was $247,000, and the average household net worth of $8. So these disparities are so extreme that they can't be changed without an affirmative, aggressive approach to economic inclusion. And the politicians today are post-civil rights leaders in general. They've gotten the benefit of the struggle of civil rights, but they don't understand how hard it was fought, and they don't have the same kind of commitment to economic inclusion as did the politicians coming out of the civil rights movement. And I believe that that is one of the biggest reasons why we don't see greater progress for Black businesses. And the electorate is not focused on economic inclusion anymore. The media and the political environment have shifted the focus into other areas. And as a result, economics is no longer a key issue.
So let me ask you this. You and I were born in the same year, 1960. And so one of the things that I think it's important to note, John, you talked about it, the leadership that we have, and it's hard. It's almost like athletics. It's hard to really compare athletes of different generations. And I think that it's hard to sometimes compare leadership of different generations. But I do think there is a void of what I call political bravery across the board in leadership today, whether we're talking about Black leadership, white leadership, politics, social, etc. How do we reignite that? How do we make sure that leaders understand that we can't continue to pull out the same playbook because it has not been working?
I would say two things. I would say first, all of us that are in business should be singing from the same hymnal. We should be on message. And a couple of things that I've talked to my colleagues around the country about, and I've talked to Reverend Jackson and Reverend Sharpton, we need to get rid of the term supplier diversity. It's 40 years out of date. Our economy is a professional services, financial services, technology-based economy, real estate development. That's where the wealth's created. So we have to get the language changed so that whenever we talk to a political leader or a business leader, we're talking about the term business diversity instead of supplier diversity. We've got to be on message. The second thing I think we have to do is we have to highlight the heroes that are still fighting within the spirit that Don talked about of Dr. King's message late in his life. And Senator Cory Booker, for example, recently sent a letter to the CEOs of Rite Aid and Kroger's asking about who are your investment bankers, who are the law firms you're using, knowing full well they weren't using Black lawyers or Black investment bankers. We have folks like Maxine Waters, when she was chairing the House Financial Services Committee, and Joyce Beatty was chairing the subcommittee on diversity and inclusion. They were forcing the banks to come and have to explain what they were doing with minority business. They had so much power and impact. So we have to celebrate those kind of leaders that are making a difference and then get more and more people elected like that. Robin Kelly in our hometown is fantastic, but they're just too few and far between. So we have to not only be on message, but we have to roll up our sleeves and support these progressive leaders and let them know how important this is to our country to have us fully included in our capitalist democracy.
Don, how do we change the dynamic of getting business to look at doing business with African Americans and companies owned by African Americans, that it is not a charity case, that it is not just an affirmative action box check, that it can be good for your bottom line? We've been trying to do that for a long time as well. How do we make that shift and make them understand that in some cases, in most cases, it's just good business?
Well, look, I think that the best example of, say, the modern age of the 1990s on, I would say would be Kwesi Mfume when he took over the NAACP. What he did is he started an economic reciprocity initiative. He targeted a particular industry. In this instance, it was the hospitality industry. And the NAACP evaluated all of the major hotel companies and how they did business or what types of business they did with Black businesses, and gave them a grading system and gave them a grade for it, and then held a press conference. And all of them failed except one company. And then from that point on, it was an annual event. And it created an environment of diversity in hotel ownership and every place else across the board, to where we have a large number of Black hotel owners. And so we have to have a more targeted, focused approach. I also think, Reverend Sharpton and Reverend Jackson did amazing things for our country. Reverend Jackson was on the front lines of the civil rights movement and did amazing things, but they can't do it all, and they shouldn't be expected to. These are economic issues, and the business community needs to step up and lead on economic issues. And then finally, what has happened is post-civil rights, you have people like Andrew Young seeking public office and being mayor of Atlanta. You had Maynard and other people who were leaders who stepped up and brought all of that knowledge and experience to public service and politics. Andrew Young, after being UN secretary, became mayor of Atlanta. We need a better group of people running for office. We need to get more business people who actually understand economics and can hit the ground running and make transformative changes right away. I have very high hopes for Wes Moore of Maryland because he comes from a business background and understands how to get things done. So I think that we have to get better qualified people elected to office who are not afraid, who the job of being mayor or congressperson or legislator is not the best job they'll ever get. It's a job that they're giving public service to, but they've got other options, or they come in with some success behind them. And I think that that would be the biggest change. And I don't think and then, I mean, people who are committed to change. And I think when you get people who can do other things and they go into public service, more often than not, they're doing it because they have an agenda that they want to move forward. And if you get Black business entrepreneurs to step up and become leaders in our government, I think you'll see a quicker change. And so that's one of the things that I'm doing, is I'm trying to encourage other people to pursue elective office, and have considered it myself as well.
Do you want to announce anything right now, or should we just wait for that?
No, but I do. I mean, I strongly believe we can't abdicate our, financial future to, people who don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
But I would add, as much as I agree with everything that Don said about the importance of elected officials, I talked about that also. It's up to us now that post George Floyd's murder, more and more African Americans are being appointed to major corporate boards. And these same individuals are sitting on the boards of hospitals and universities in their local communities. And the vast majority of us sometimes get into these boardrooms and we get uncomfortable talking about uncomfortable issues. We get uncomfortable making the white folks uncomfortable. And we're not doing what the late Congressman John Lewis said, making good trouble. Speaking out when we see things that are not right, that are not just. And there are so many of us in these boardrooms where we can make a difference for us. And not only how many executives are in the C-suite, but how the business is being done, what contracts and opportunities are coming to Black entrepreneurs. And as you know, we started a conference over 20 years ago called the Black Corporate Directors Conference with Charles Tribbett from Russell Reynolds. And the whole idea is at every conference, we have what we call the conscience of the conference. We've had the late Congressman John Lewis there. We've had President Obama there and Valerie Jarrett, but we've also had Andy Young, and we've had Congressman Clyburn, and we've had Harry Belafonte. We've had those types of leaders there, people who had marched with Dr. King to remind us that we have this responsibility to speak out for all of us when we're in the boardroom. So a lot of it is up to us also that are in the private sector to fight for economic opportunity for Black people in our leadership roles that we have.
Yeah, I think that's important because I've been dealing with a number of corporations in the DE&I space. And when you look at many corporations, that was a box checked. There was no direct report. There was no real power often given to those folks. And it makes it very difficult to institute change within corporations if it's just window dressing. So you're right, John, without people on the board who can kind of push that along, that's why it's been so problematic for so long. Let me take us to what I also see as a crutch for us. And I'm curious what you gentlemen think. And Don, I'll start with you. If you look at the reliance on corporate American dollars to organizations of color, to much of what we do. Maxine Waters has talked about the idea that the enemy, in quotes, is often funding your movement. Is that just something that we have to do? How can we kind of cut those purse strings, if you will?
Well, I mean, that's a very, very good point. I also want to touch on what John mentioned previously about these board seats. The vast majority of people, of Black people who get into these positions of power, whether it be on a board, whether it be in a governmental position or contracting position, are either afraid or unwilling to advance our agenda of economic inclusion. If you look at these public employee pension systems and the dismal numbers in terms of how they allocate capital, and many of them are in communities where a large percentage of the retirees that they're serving are Black people or people of color. And many are run or have senior people that are Black, but yet they don't see fit to advance our agenda. And so I mean, unfortunately, every Black person doesn't have an agenda of economic inclusion. And so what we all have to do is not let somebody get into a position and sit there and give the appearance of legitimacy because they say, hey, we got someone Black, or we got 2 Black people on our board, or the CIO, Chief Investment Officer of our fund, is Black. And what are you all complaining about? They just can't find enough Black businesses to do business with. It gives the appearance of legitimacy. And so we have to say, as Black business people, we got to get rid of them. And because they hurt us more than someone white who we have to fight against because they give this appearance of legitimacy. Now, getting to this idea of how our organizations are funded, another thing, I mean, most Black businesses are struggling to make ends meet. And so we don't invest enough in our own organizations and institutions. I mean, look, I have been a supporter of Reverend Sharpton's, and he is not in a zone that I'm in. I'm not in the financial services business, but he's been an advocate of it. And so my view is if John Rogers or Advent Capital or Loop Capital or Vista get more capital to deploy, one day it may come to us, but it'll certainly go to more Black businesses, and we all have a better chance. So we do need to invest in our own organizations so that they have independence, because there are many organizations that give, again, the appearance that they're advocates for our cause, but they actually in effect don't. And then finally, we cannot have these companies thinking that doing business with Black people or Black businesses is philanthropic. It's actually very good business for them. They get great talent. I mean, Ariel Capital is second to none in terms of results and performance. So doing business with Black businesses is smart. You get more competency, you get more expertise, you get more talent. And then what we have to do is say that any kind of relationship with us needs to be reciprocal. If we're going to buy your product, you need to buy ours.
John, your thoughts?
I was just going to echo what Don said, that, Reverend Jackson always says baseball became a better sport, once Jackie Robinson started to play, and then Hank Aaron and Ernie Banks and Willie Mays. When, that talent came into the big leagues, Major League Baseball was a better place. We have that talent. It's all throughout this country that's left out, that's not on the playing field because of historical racism and discrimination that we face in this country. And we have to overcome that. There's just this talent that's out there that can really increase the GDP of our country and make this country stronger if everyone is fully participating. And then, as you know, once we have stronger Black businesses, we will hire each other, we'll have more employment. And when you have higher employment and have higher wealth, you're going to have better healthcare, you're going to have better schools, you're going to have less violence in the communities. So many good things will come to our society when we're fully included the way we should be.
And how do you, in your opinion, how do we cut those purse strings? We are still, as a community, very reliant on corporate America for a myriad of things that go on within our community.
I just think we have to continue to push, and that's where the civil rights leaders are so important. When they threaten boycotts, people respond. And I just think that if we could get all of our civil rights organizations on message together and fight together on these common issues, I think we can make so much more progress than each organization going its own direction and not really coming together with a common agenda. So I've been an advocate of that, and I think that's just so important. It's just so critical that I think we have to celebrate those leaders that are pushing the agenda and making a difference. So in Chicago, I can just give an example. The University of Chicago right now is the only university in Chicago that works with minority businesses in everything they do. They work with over 150 minority companies, from architects to lawyers to public relations firms to money managers for the endowment, technology, everything. But the other universities won't follow suit. And the vast majority of the museums won't follow suit. We have to be able to shine a light on that kind of discrepancy and that kind of unfairness. And I think the political leaders have to do that. The media has to do that. And those of us that are sitting in boardrooms have to point those things out, the unfairness that's there, and hold people accountable to the promises they make to us around diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, it's going to take some bravery, though, quite frankly. Bob Johnson at a recent Black Enterprise Black Male Summit talked exactly about what you just suggested, John, that there be more of a consolidation or a partnership, if you will, between the civil rights organizations that would save on money to a great degree. But if we're honest, and I like to try to be in these, there is ego and human nature involved in all of that, because you go from being a singular head of to a collective head of, and that's part of the bravery that leadership will have to take if we see some of this movement. Let me move to, if I may, a couple of things. The everyday man, the men and the men and women who aren't necessarily looking at high finance, don't necessarily live in corporate America. They just want to have cable, send their kids to school, have a vacation a year, and live the old school American dream comfortably. How do we get them to understand what this wealth gap means, and what can they do to increase their incomes? But is there anything they can do in assisting this fight?
Well, look, I think the first thing is, in fact, kind of following up and tying John's answer to what you just asked. The first thing is that Black businesses, we actually have to have a better relationship with our fellow citizens. We need to make it clear to Black Americans why there's value for us being here. I mean, we aren't going to be able to sell a story that, hey, we need to diversify the real estate industry so that Don Peebles can make another $1 billion. No one's buying into that. So we have to explain and make our case to Black Americans as to why it's important that we exist. And we have to be prepared to make that case in terms of how do we do it. So we should be the vehicle for accessing the American dream. My company commits to 35% of all of our contracts. And by the way, our project pipeline is now $8 billion. For $8 billion of our projects, that 35% of them go to minority and women-owned businesses, with a heavy emphasis on Black businesses. And so it's providing career, job, and entrepreneurial opportunities to the average citizen, because the average citizen, they may want to have a comfortable life in their share of the American dream, but they want a better version of the American dream for their children and their grandchildren. And the pathway to a better access to the American dream in this country, which is a capitalistic democracy, is through business and entrepreneurship. And so we need to show people that it's accessible to them. And that's the other thing that the media has basically told our kids every day: if you can't play ball or sing or act, forget it. You aren't going to have great wealth and great opportunity. And we need to expose more of our young people to the successful entrepreneurs that are out here so that they can dream these big dreams. I mean, I think that if John would tell you about why he's successful, it'll be because his parents exposed him to things. Why am I successful? Because my parents exposed me to things and told me that I could dream big dreams and I could make those dreams come true. We need to do that to our young people so that they can believe in the future. But we got to make our case as that there's value to Black people for us to exist.
John, let's take that a step further, if you would. Our generation often, we're taught to kind of make sure that you had a job with benefits and get into a corporation if you could. And entrepreneurship, to a great degree, kind of fell by the wayside. This current generation, the last couple, see entrepreneurship in a way and have been introduced to it, sometimes simply by the Times, gig economy, and the like, but they see it in a different way. What do you see in terms of the landscape of entrepreneurship today?
I think the landscape for entrepreneurship is starting to look up post George Floyd.
Yeah.
Our civic committee in Chicago, which is sort of our 84 most influential businesses, they've created a business diversity initiative, hiring a full-time executive to oversee that. I'm co-chairing the task force with Scott Santee, who's the CEO of Illinois Toolworks. And they're committed to now these large companies to work with minority businesses in everything we do. They're starting with technology because they know that's where the economy is going. and they're going to do all the other aspects of the spending. And we're hoping that it can be a model for how the other big urban communities can do the same thing, bring the business community together to be on message of being willing to do business with Black businesses and everything that we do. Because one of the things we constantly remind ourselves of is the message matters. So as I said earlier, supplier diversity is 40 years out of date. We have to move to business diversity. The other problem we have, as much as I agree that we need access to capital, I needed access to capital when I started Ariel 40 years ago, but most importantly, I needed access to customers.
Yeah.
And Melody's on the cover of Forbes, this current issue, talking about the fact that we need access to customers. And the last thing I'll say about that, when you look at the Black Enterprise list, the top 100 companies, there are many, many companies there that started out as McDonald's suppliers because McDonald's agreed to buy everything from ice cream toppings to sausages from Black entrepreneurs.
Mm-hmm.
And we need access to customers, full stop. And people forget about that. They give us a micro loan and think we're okay. We need those customers and opportunities to grow and build our businesses.
It's interesting, John, you mentioned that because Butch often talks about the idea of in today's world, while you still need access to capital, it really is not the biggest hindrance. In his opinion, it is often getting to scale. And that's almost an impossibility for many Black businesses. Talk to me about Project Black, if you will, John, what you've been involved with, because to a great degree, if you guys can navigate these waters, that will help tremendously in giving a jump start, a trampoline jump, if you will, to Black businesses to try to reach, while not parity, certainly be in the game in a greater degree.
Well, this is Melody Hobson's vision. You know, Melody Hobson is the co-CEO of Ariel. She's been with us 32 years and is an extraordinary leader. You know, she moonlights as the chairman of Starbucks and on the board of JP Morgan Chase. But she's fantastic. And she came up with this idea post George Floyd to see if we could figure out a way to build Black businesses of scale. Because she saw in Chicago, again, what George Johnson and John Johnson and others had been able to do when they built businesses of scale, the impact they were having on our community, which was so powerfully positive. So we've raised now about between 1.4 and 1.5 billion dollars in private.
Which we should know, forgive my interruptions, but that is extraordinary for a first call. We should note that and give you kudos for that. That does not happen often, that kind of money on the first round.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it was our first fund, and we've got not only Melody's great leadership, but a terrific CEO of Ariel Alternatives and Project Black, Les Brun, who had helped found Hamilton Lane years ago. Is just an extraordinary leader and leader in the corporate boardroom. And so we've had that kind of leadership that's helped us to be able to build out this first fund. And the idea is to basically model it after what we saw at McDonald's. You know, McDonald's, the way they would do it is they would often find a senior African-American at McDonald's, someone who was just, you know, extraordinarily talented, and then marry that person with a company that was either for sale or had a division for sale or a plan for the CEO to retire. And so that Black executive would get into a leadership role and then have a commitment that McDonald's was going to do major business with them. And when you look at Eric Johnson's Baldwin Richardson company, you look at Michael Thompson's business, you look at so many of these large businesses of scale that are now hundreds of millions of dollars of sales, second and third generation business leaders coming, it's because you had that anchor institution willing to do business with these companies. And so that's what Melody and the team and Les are doing. We're going to look for companies that are either minority owned, where they can take our capital and use it to grow to scale. That will be important. Or when we can find a company that's going to be for sale, and then we can bring in minority leadership, minority executives, minority board members, minority commitment, business to do business with other minorities. And what Melody would say, minoritize a company that had previously not been a minority owned. And again, that's flat from they come directly from the McDonald's playbook. So we've made one acquisition, Sorensen Communications, that helps people who are hard of hearing in the corporate world and the government world. We'll hopefully have a couple new deals this year. And it's extremely exciting. And it's the first of the fund of its kind. And I'm optimistic that we're going to really build some business of scale that will really impact our communities.
John, do you feel that there has to be some altruism in that from those that would sell those companies, or suggest that they're comfortable with, minoritizing, to use the word, their companies? It's got to be some altruism, I would think, somewhere.
I think there is some altruism to this. I think that is an important point. And at the same time, I think some of these companies that will now be minority owned, doors are going to open for them that they never could have imagined, because there still are progressive institutions out there who want to do business with minority companies. As much as we get heartbroken all the time when they don't live up to their commitments, there's still doors that get open when you're coming in as a Black business owner, as a Black entrepreneur. So altruism is there, but I think these companies will be more valuable as a minority owned company than they were when they were a white owned company.
And that's the importance that you both have echoed, the idea of we have to kind of redesign how we look at our approach and our conversation and our wording of our intricacies within business, because for too long, as Don suggested, it's been seen as charitable, or, to use the word that was weaponized, welfare to Black folk, even corporate welfare or funding to Black people. Don, I'd love to get into what you're doing with a group of folks there in New York City, the building, hopefully, of the Affirmation Tower, and what you want it to be. I know that one of the things that it will be interesting to see, and I'll let you get into the details of it, but it can certainly be a blueprint that can be echoed in many cities if in fact it is proven to be successful.
Yeah, I mean, look, real estate is a low barrier to entry business, and it's about the #1 wealth generator in the country. And so you can start off and do something small, and you can scale it up. I mean, our first building was, $10 million, and I think the current deal we're doing in downtown LA is $1.6 billion. So you can scale up, and you can scale up pretty rapidly in the development business. However, I just did an interview with a publication about the lack of diversity within the commercial real estate industry. Less than 1% of real estate developers of any kind, or any area in this country are Black. So you have a severe underrepresentation. And so, but real estate and buildings are very visible, unlike other businesses, unlike asset management. You actually can see the outcome of an investment. And so we decided to pursue a site that the state of New York owns, and to do something very different. If New York is known for anything, it's known for its skyline. And coming out of a global pandemic and unprecedented social protesting and quest for economic inclusion by Black Americans, we felt that the best way to answer those two moments was to build an incredible building that would be transformative. I mean, if you look at New York coming back from the Great Depression, it was Rockefeller Center and the Empire State Building. After 9/11, it was the Freedom Tower and One World Trade. And now coming out of a global pandemic, we feel that answering the moment is to build the tallest building in the Western Hemisphere. It's a project that's 80% Black owned, designed by one of the greatest architects of our generation, who's Black, David Adjaye, who did the Museum for African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., and also the oldest Black-owned construction company in the country. McKizzak is both a builder and a owner, and to develop something that's never been done, a $3.4 billion project that answers the two moments in this country and the two moments in New York. One, that America's resilient, New York is resilient and it's back. And two, that we're going to build things differently. And that project also, we've committed to 35% minority contracting. And there, I mean, the scale of that project will produce at least $1.2 billion in contracting opportunities, provide housing for the Civil Rights Museum, provide housing for the NAACP, and to send a message of the great capacity that we as Black Americans have. And so to make the point, the first major skyscraper in New York City ever built by Black developers, would be the tallest building in the Western Hemisphere, and it'll be the tallest for a while because it's 1,667 feet tall. It's going to be, several hundred feet taller. But it's a dream and a vision, and that's I think also about what we got to be telling our young people is to dream and have these visions of what the possibilities are. And Affirmation Tower will reflect what you get when you have a fully inclusive project. And we named it Affirmation Tower because it affirms the American promise to us all.
How close are you to actually being able to break ground and know that you have everything that you need to move forward? And I would think after groundbreaking, you'd still be 4 or 5 years away from cutting the ribbon and opening some doors.
Yeah, it'll take about 4 years to build a building. But what's interesting, when we submitted our proposal to the state of New York, normally the challenge is financing, but we submitted a proposal and a vision that was 100% financed. And so they felt, they even told us that they were highly confident that we would get this financed and built. And so, the exercise is one, going through the politics, and which we're navigating, and then two, the hard work is actually to build this building. But we're excited about it. It's we think that we'll get a decision out of the state of New York in the coming months, and hopefully we'll work something out with them on this site. And if not, we'll go find another site in New York or someplace else to build it. But its time has come to do something like this. And African Americans, there's not a major building other than the one I own, south of 110th Street, that was developed by Black developers in New York City. That is inexcusable. And that's because there's systemic discrimination when it comes to the allocation of capital.
And we should note the site that you're looking at, for those that are not familiar with New York or Manhattan, is prime real estate, not too far from the Javits Center, from my understanding, which is the convention center. So we're talking very prime real estate when we're looking at that portion of Manhattan. Let me see if I can, as we're winding down here, take us to some reality. If Affirmation Tower becomes real, John, one of the important things I believe in success of anything is symbolism, and the idea of imagery and what you're able to see, because as 100 Black men saying goes, if they can see it, they can be it. The idea of actually being able to see success. I'm working on a project that would be a documentary of the late great Ron Brown, Commerce Secretary, who died in a tragic plane crash, who was a mentor of mine. And he always talked about that, the idea of needing to make sure that people saw us as successful. And it changes the idea of when you walk in a room, if people see you as that. How do we continue to do that and raise the bar of education, of better financial wherewithal and education? Because for too long, we just haven't been keen to that, if you will.
Well, I put three things together quickly. Number one, it makes it heartbreaking, that we've lost Ebony and Jet.
Yeah.
And they celebrated our lives and shown the spotlight on those of us that are having success. And we could see it. Of course, Black Enterprises continues to do that over generations. And I couldn't wait to see the magazine when I was a young entrepreneur and see what I could learn, see what I could be. And I would read about people and call them up and try to get them on the board of directors of Ariel. It's just so important to have these vibrant businesses doing so well. The other thing, though, that we have to do is we have to do more in our urban communities around financial literacy. So switching gears a little bit. 25 years ago, we started the Ariel Community Academy, and we give kids starting in first grade real dollars to invest in real stocks. And over the years, we would do things like take 6th, 7th, and 8th graders to the annual meeting of McDonald's when Don Thompson was the CEO. Mm-hmm. So these Black kids from the south side of Chicago could see a Black CEO running an annual meeting. And afterwards, we'd spend an hour with him and his wife, and they would talk about, what it took to be the CEO of McDonald's. And the chairman of the board would be there also, Andy McKenna. So I think that we have to get our major corporations and our entrepreneurial businesses to partner with urban public schools to be in the schools where the kids can see and learn what we're doing. And we can then open up our networks to show these kids what's possible. And that's what we've been trying to do these last 25 years at the Ariel Community Academy. It's not perfect. It's not always, every year it's sometimes a little choppy. You know, public schools are challenged in this country. But, you know, I know STEM is important. That's great. But we need to get these kids this opportunity to see Black business leaders running large companies or starting their own businesses, and we can make a difference that way.
Yeah, and with any kid, the idea of just getting in the habit of, you know, if you start to learn money from day one, it's much easier to keep it because as we like to say, it's not what you make, it's what you keep. Don, what would you like to see us do by means of, you know, better education in the world of finance and dollars?
Well, I think the first thing is that we have to better educate our kids, and that starts early on. So my wife and I helped fund a school in Miami in its poorest area called Care Elementary. And it's a private school with support from the state. And about 35% of our kids are homeless. And it's pre-K through sixth grade, and we're working on a middle school now. And these kids are getting the same kind of private education that my kids got at their private schools, in the top private schools in Miami and in New York. And so I think that is, we all have to invest more in doing like what John did, or backing other schools. We did a charter school in Washington, D.C. for the hospitality sector. So I think that it's exposing our kids, but also what happened is Black businesses and Black entrepreneurs were under assault. The media did not cheer us on. I mean, if you think about the 1980s and 1990s, there were the mainstream media assaulted Black businesses and Black entrepreneurs and went after Black politicians. So the Black businesses, we all began to kind of want to be low key and kind of be under the radar. We can't afford to do that because the media gives our kids a constant dose of sports figures and entertainers as to what they can dream of being. And it's so far out of reach. When there's a high probability if they work hard, get a good education, they can do what I do or John does. And so we have to be more visible and show these kids other options and show them that there is a wide spectrum of being able to pursue their dreams and ideas, and get them to begin to think about the great possibilities that are out here.
Well, one thing I just jump in there, Don, is I think in the long run, you're exactly right, but being a little provocative, at least in Chicago right now, if you're an African-American kid in public high school, the probability of you becoming a professional athlete is much higher than you becoming a partner in a law firm, accounting firm, consulting firm, investment bank, all put together, private equity, venture capital. Because there's so few of us that have been having opportunities to be partners in the private equity world or in these other professional services businesses. And so it's a weird problem that we have, but that's the reality. It's not even a close call. There are many, many more African-American professional football players, basketball players, et cetera, than they are partners in these major parts of our economy. And that has to change. So over time, I agree with you. That's where we need to be going, to give us opportunity everywhere. But right now, the opportunities are in a very limited part of our economy.
Yeah, and we have to start to understand the importance of controlling our own. The idea you talked about, the loss of Ebony and Jet that was held for so long by the Johnson family. Junior Bridgman, we should know, the former NBA player who went into business and obtained wealth through franchising, has purchased Ebony and Jet and is on the way to try to bring it back to its prominence, as we saw the repurchasing of Essence. And of course, obviously, the Graves family has been, on the fore of keeping Black enterprise alive. And, it just in my field, it's so vastly important to make sure that we continue to control content and control our images, because that is, whether we like it or not, the way most Americans learn. Through content. It's not school. That's not the greatest influence. It really is. And it has become, with the advent of technology and the cell phone, the way we learn. Let me give you all, as we are up against it, just an opportunity to give a closing thought of what you'd like those who are watching today, that you'd like to see them do by means of not only moving forward as a collective, our community, but individually what they can do. Because often when we go to these conferences, and again, John, you and I have been on many a panel over the years, I hear from the crowd so often, how do I get where you're sitting? How do I essentially become successful, become solid, become sound financially? What would you tell people?
Well, it's funny. I have this discussion all the time with my daughter and her mom, Desiree, who actually coincidentally bought Fashion Fair. So she's a part of that Johnson legacy. But I think we all have to fight together for each other. That's the bottom line. Because whether we're in the corporate boardroom or someone who's in the executive suite or someone who's an up and coming VP or junior VP somewhere, you have an ability to speak up and speak out and say, hey, we're going to give a legal contract here, or we're going to do an executive recruiting contract there. We're going to, need some commercial real estate, whatever it is, and making sure we're asking to make sure minority businesses are included in those decisions, and remind the people we're working with that all these anchor institutions in our community say they care about diversity and inclusion. They say they care about minority businesses. It's in their annual reports. CEOs talk about it all the time at the Urban League dinner or what have you. So I always tell young people, if you're in a company or in an anchor institution, remind them that you're just helping the company do what they say they care about. You're helping them to live the values that they say that are important to them. And so you're going to be somewhere where you're going to decide on an advertising contract, and why it shouldn't Black Enterprise have an opportunity at that, or WVON radio in Chicago, or whatever it happens to be. It's up to us for us to fight together and sometimes make folks uncomfortable. But again, in the spirit of John Lewis, we've got to make good trouble.
John?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we can do and what I'd like to see more of my peers and colleagues do, is we need to adopt people. And what I mean by that is I think John, you or me, and anyone who's successful can actually trace their early success based on someone who took an interest in them and helped them, gave them some guidance or the like. I can think of several people who helped me and gave me guidance along the way to help me grow and start and grow my business. And so one of the things that I do is I talk to one person every day for 15 minutes who's an aspiring entrepreneur or an entrepreneur that I meet, or who emails me or calls my office, or I meet at an event that I speak at, or they saw me on some television program, but I do it with one person every day. And I've written a couple books, and I try to go and speak out at organizations that are not the usual suspects of where we go, but they're smaller organizations, smaller entrepreneurial groups, going to speak to people in schools and things of that nature, so that I can tell them my story and they can see me as a human being like them and understand that it's possible. And to give people and mentor them. I try to place people with capital, but try to help each other and take a sense of responsibility in moving our community forward. And what John talked about helping each other, I think one of the things that we have to do is root for each other and be supportive of each other, root for each other's success, try to go and do everything we can to, if we have the opportunity to help one of us be successful or get more business or to get another opportunity, to think about doing that and do it. And I think that if we begin to work more together and to open up the eyes of our young people, and that there are great possibilities out here in entrepreneurship, I think that we can be transformative, and we can do it on a more rapid basis too.
John Rogers, Don Peoples, thank you very much for a very interesting conversation. In order for us to make change, I think we can take away from both of you that we've got to be provocative, to use your term, John, and the idea of we must be intentional to make sure that we move forward. Gentlemen, I thank you very much for your time, and thank you very much for watching.
Thank you for joining us for tonight's Economic Equity and Racial Justice Town Hall on Bridging the Wealth Gap. My name is Derek Dingle, Chief Content Officer for Black Enterprise. We hope you have gained valuable information and insight from this virtual experience and will apply them to address the challenges of Black wealth creation and ensure African Americans are on the path to financial empowerment. We would like to thank our dynamic moderator, Ed Gordon, and powerful speakers, John Rogers Jr. and R. Donahue Peoples, for their impassioned and impactful conversation that will inspire us all to take immediate action. We would also like to extend our deep appreciation to our sponsor, Nationwide, for its role in producing tonight's program. Remember, you and others can engage in on-demand viewings of this session on blackenterprise.com, and we encourage you to share your thoughts and comments on our social media channels using the hashtag #BETownHall. Black Enterprise is the #1 Black digital media brand, and as such, we present content offerings to enhance your business and financial lives. However, to maximize our impact, we must act now. For more information on our future town hall sessions and events, go to blackenterprise.com/BE events. Thank you for joining us. Have a